welcome. My name is Jessica Morgan. I was a close friend of Chris's, and I am also vice president of this congregation, and it is my honor to welcome you today to celebrate Chris's life. There's some Spidey themes going on, and so I have a quote from Charlotte's Web, and you'll see it down here. "Why did you do all of this for me?" he asked. "I don't deserve it. I've never done anything for you." "You have been my friend," replied Charlotte. That in itself is a tremendous thing. The family has asked not to have flowers. They have asked to please consider a donation to the Children's Fund. I let the family know I may have a plant or two, and don't worry. I understood it was supposed to be you wear a superhero shirt. Again, I said do not worry. I would like to read one of my favorite poems by the poet Mary Oliver. It is called "The Summer Day." Excuse me. Okay. Who made the world? Who made the swan and the black bear? Who made the grasshopper? This grasshopper, I mean, the one who has flung herself out of the grass, the one who is eating sugar out of my hand, who is moving her jaws back and forth instead of up and down, who is gazing around with her enormous and complicated eyes. Now she lifts her pale forearms and thoroughly washes her face. Now she snaps her wings open and floats away. I don't know exactly what a prayer is. I do know how to pay attention, how to fall down into the grass, how to kneel down into the grass, how to be idle and blessed, how to stroll through the fields, which is what I've been doing all day. Tell me, what else should I have done? Doesn't everything die at last, and too soon? Tell me, what is it you plan to do with your one wild and precious life? I'm Paula. Chris was my oso. Kids who come from challenging backgrounds learn quickly to read body language to determine whether or not someone is safe or if it is good to be a good time to be at ease. We learn to tread lightly. We learn when it's okay to joke around. Chris had the ability to give the feeling of safety quickly, and I think that sense of safe person was what initially drew me to him and made him such a superhero. I had been at Cal State San Bernardino for a year already and was a resident assistant in the commuter dorm when Chris started his first year of college in 1995. We met because of Star Trek. I was immediately drawn to him, and I knew very quickly I wanted to know him better. By the end of October, we were dating. By December, we were having conversations about forever. And in February of 1996, we lived together and had a fur baby. I remember strange children approaching him in grocery stores to hug him around his legs. He always seemed so surprised. But also, I think it made him feel good to be so trusted so easily. This made his choice of majors and aspirations to be a social worker fairly obvious, but I worried for his gentle heart that the evil that humans can do to one another could injure my sensitive oso. Some of you here know how protective I can be, which thank you. You know how protective I can be when someone I care about feels pain, emotional or physical. It was always a challenge to watch him experience the pain he felt every day at a job he worked so very hard to do well. I know how much it hurt him. I also know he took on more than was expected in a 9-to-5 job because he knew that there were kids who needed him, who needed help. His sense of justice and righteousness didn't begin or end at work. This is not to say that he flaunted his ethics or proselytized his belief. He led his life according to a code, and he was an example by his actions. Every day, he made me proud that he said okay when I told him we were getting married. That was nearly 30 years ago. He cared for us, our boo and I. He took care of us. He provided and he loved us. He played and joked and was our hero. I would watch him and wonder how I got so lucky. When I would tell him this, he would demur and claim he was the lucky one. He used to say he didn't know how I put up with him. How could I not? I love him with my whole heart. I love the honor of him. I love his compassion. I love his fierce sense of justice and right versus wrong. I love the geekiness that we share and how he got me in ways no one else has ever gotten me in my entire life. My very best friend and I fell in love very quickly. Neither of us believe in love at first sight, but maybe both of us had parts of ourselves that recognized our other half, and we needed to have such an intense and immediate response to one another because we were meant to spend the entirety of his adult life together. Maybe the fact that we fell in love so quickly was because his life was going to be so short, and we needed all the time we had to be together. Today, there's an emptiness where his half of my soul once filled me up. Chris once wrote, "There are moments in a person's life that cleave their existence in two, into before and after. Usually we don't see them coming." He may have gotten the concept from elsewhere, but he explained further how we are sometimes given a gift you didn't even know you needed. Chris was a gift to me. And in his words, I didn't go looking for love, but it found me all the same. And an ember deep inside me, a spark I didn't even know was there,
is fanned into an inferno, and I am consumed by it. But here's the thing. That ember that remains inside of me and Boo, and all of you inside this room, was lit by my oso. That ember is like starlight in a clear night sky. Chris once wrote, yeah, there's a lot more darkness than light up there, but in the beginning, it was all darkness. Chris would want us to fan the ember of love inside us, do good when we see it needing done, because each time that light inside shines through the dark, love wins. We win against those who would extinguish it. The loss of my oso doesn't add to the darkness. He just lives inside so many more hearts, and the influence of his soul on mine made me want to build a bonfire.
Thank you, Paula. I recall very early on meeting Chris. We worked together. He was a court officer, and I was one of the county councils he worked with, and someone had said to me, that guy is weird, isn't he? And I said, yes, isn't that wonderful? I have an excerpt from a writing of Chris's that I have edited that I'd like to read that talks about his love of movies and where that came from. Fanboy versus Ghosts of Childhood. I turned 7 in the winter of early 1983. I lived in a warm, pleasant home in the desert just outside Las Vegas. I remember that home as being at once someplace safe and loving, and as a place of endless adventure just outside the door. I spent my days riding my bike and playing an Atari and hammering random pieces of wood together. I played with army men on the hill out back. I peered under rocks and chased lizards and climbed onto the roof, terrifying my mother. It was that perfect time in childhood when I had become just aware enough of the world to realize that there was awesome mischief to be had, but still too young to understand there was anything wrong about it at all. On that winter's day in 1983, seated next to my dad, I saw the first movie I had ever seen. It was E.T. The smell of popcorn permeated the cavernous, dimly lit room. The seats were comfortable and seemed to tower over my head like they'd been built for a race of giants from an old fairy tale. I felt butterflies in my stomach, not knowing what Elliot was about to find waiting for him in the dark. I cheered when Elliot freed the frogs in class and cried with Gertie when E.T. seemed to die. I soaked in the story and the emotions. There were other movies, of course. I remember screaming in the car during the library scene in Ghostbusters at the drive-in, but there are none that evoke the emotional reaction like E.T.
Well, hello there. It's a full room. My name is Patty Little, and I met Chris when he was a student at Cal State San Bernardino. I was one of his sociology professors. There are other sociology professors here in the room. I see Marcia Marks back there. I know Elsa was planning to come, but I don't see her. Is she over there? Oh. Oh, there you are behind. Okay. Yeah, so Marcia and Elsa are here, and Mary Texera is in New York. She was his mentor, and so I sent her the link for YouTube so she can watch it streaming. So, Chris was Mary's teaching assistant in her race and racism class. So why are all these professors here, right? You know, well, you have to know what an impression Chris made on us, right? Oh my goodness. I don't need to tell you because you already know how incredibly smart Chris was. Clear. But I can let you know what an impression he made on his professors. It is rare to get a student with his level of intellectual ability. His gift was more than having a good memory or being a good reader or being able to figure out what the professor wants and write it back to us. Are there guilty people in the room? Chris had what C. Wright Mills called the sociological imagination. He was able to understand discrete bits of information and see how they all fit together into a larger pattern. He could put it all into a larger context, and he was able to understand where he fit into it. And he wasn't personally affronted by any of it. In his intellectual honesty, he took a stand as an avid feminist, an anti-racist, a supporter of gay rights, even though he was a man, white, and straight. He and I talked about this. It's like being teacher's pet. You don't get to choose. It's just how things are. Chris was committed to dismantling inequality based on personal characteristics over which we have no control. I was proud of him when he chose a life of service to the children of our community after he completed his master's degree in social work. It was where his heart was. He found the place where he could do the most good, just like him, right? Some of us, including me, had a moment of regret that he did not choose to get his PhD and become a professor himself. But even though he could have done brilliantly in that profession, he chose a life of hands-on heroism in keeping with his heart. It was in this capacity that I ran into him again years later in the juvenile courtroom. I had to rescind guardianship of a 17-and-a-half-year-old grandson who was out of control. It was a painful experience, and I felt guilty, powerless, and ashamed. As I was leaving the courtroom, a kind voice from over my head said, "Professor Little?" I looked up into his eyes. Go ahead, you get this. And he said, "It's me, Chris Brannon." I was happy to see him, but he went further. He said, "I want you to know that no one in this courtroom blames you for this outcome. We've seen it before." He then took me out to dinner, and we caught up with each other's lives. It was the start of happy years of friendship between our families, although he never stopped calling me professor. We spent time in each other's homes, went out to dinner together, and most importantly, we went to the movies together frequently. Because sharing these cinematic experiences of heroes making a difference in all kinds of nuanced ways was one of Chris's love languages. He felt and expressed deep things through these stories. We had just been to see the new Spider-Man movie the night of his stroke, and he and I were still texting our thoughts about it until after 8 o'clock at night, I got Paula's message about his stroke only a few hours later. I think it is safe to say that Chris was still thinking the thoughts of a hero until he was no longer with us. This was the motif of his life. And as I look around and see us all from various parts of his life connected by the strands of his love for us, I would say that we are all part of the amazing web that was his life, and what a privilege this has been.
Hi, everybody. For those of us who haven't met, my name is Vicki, and I have had the pleasure of working with Christopher for several years now. I know, she being soft-spoken like we've never met before, but that's okay. Christopher has been a social worker longer than I've been legal to drink. And I've got the sore hip, and the wrinkles to prove just how long that really has been. In that time, he spent more years than many do working on the front lines, investigating reports of children being harmed and helping families stay together. In our conversations and through his work, it was apparent that he understood the tenuous balance between the help we provide and the trauma that we break open in doing our duty. As his lovely wife Paula recently stated, he thought deeply and struggled most with the times that he couldn't affect change. He was a deep soul. I was lucky enough to meet Christopher in 2017 when I transferred to our juvenile dependency court. He had been there a few years at this point after the fire of the front lines had been too much and decided that he needed to do something different. In the first moments I spent any time working with Christopher, we were sitting in silence, which I am so very okay with, by the way, waiting for court to go into session, and he turned to me asking, if you were stuck on a desert island and you could only take one movie with you, what would it be? I, of course, said Groundhog Day because it's a classic, and I thought it was very clever given this situation and the scenario, watching a movie about experiencing a day over and over and over again. And he, of course, picked Serenity because in the end he aimed to misbehave. There were no stock questions to get to know a random stranger there. He went straight to show me your mind. Show me a bit of your soul. And that's how he collected us. So many of the wonderful people that I see in this room today. Those of you who are so unabashedly yourselves that you were collected by Christopher as his friends in a series of moments like those. Not too long after we met, I transferred to another program that oversaw people looking to take care of children in foster care, those who felt the call to help, be it for kin or strangers. And I was lucky enough not only to find more of you in this room along for the ride at that time, but much to Jane Canoe's consternation, I'm sure, I drew over more wonderful souls from court. Christopher joined his sister Teresa in this program, and she, of course, established her dominance right off the bat, dubbing him as Brannon the Lesser, a title that remained on his cubicle wall for years to come. Despite this title, Christopher would consistently tell me and others that it was the best damn job he had ever had. I'd accuse him of blowing smoke when he'd say that, and he'd plainly look at me claiming he was incapable of such a social activity as flattery. He'd often stop by my office after meeting with a family for an interview and announce proudly, "I made another one cry." And I'd cut right in, saying that couldn't possibly be true given his cheerful demeanor and his welcoming smile. And he'd say he hated my face, and we'd laugh together. But I knew what he meant. He'd sat with another person and got them to show a piece of their soul. He'd sat with a complete stranger and they told him about their lowest points and their most treasured joys. It was what he did, and he was good at it. Despite repeatedly insisting he was the only person that could offend somebody by not saying something. Now, not to lead all of you to believe that our friendship was all deep discussions and greater purposes, we spent most of our time trading laughs. He was skilled at the dad jokes, and I am quick with the well-timed meme or the animal voice over TikTok. And so, in honor of this part of our friendship, and as I can't share my vault of TikTok gold with you today, I'd like to take a shot at some dad jokes, social work style, in Christopher's honor. Now, please remember this isn't my arena, so laugh easily, please, for my fragile ego. And if any of them don't land well, I asked Wilma Campos for help. She's the one over there that's always smiling. You can send your complaints to her. A social worker turned the corner and was facing a mugger with a gun. The mugger orders, "Your money or your life?" And the social worker looks at him and says, "I'm a social worker. I don't have money or life." When is it okay for a social worker to be judgmental? Only to criticize a nurse for being judgmental, which we totally do, and I'm sorry if there's nurses in here, but we totally do. Doing a good job as a social worker is like peeing in a wetsuit. You get a warm feeling, but no one else notices. So, thank you for sharing those laughs with me today. It did him an honor and me a solid. Because despite the worthy goal of protecting children and the deep soul seeking, the laughter together was the best part. And certainly the part I'm going to miss the most about having Christopher as a friend. So thank you.
unto my lot that I should rise and you should not. I'll gently rise and I'll softly call. Good night, and joy be with you all. Good night, and joy be with you all.
I didn't write out what I'm going to say because I have too much to say. And so I wore a costume and I brought flowers. And I helped with the service. And I was looking back through text messages and Facebook and that kind of thing, and posted some things on the Kudo board. So there's two things I'll share, maybe three. And so one of the first gifts Chris ever gave me, and I think how we started to become friends, was when I muttered something in Klingon. May have been a cuss, nobody knew. And then I found December 9, 2017, and I sent him this message. So, our Facebook friendship came up today. Because I know that a public announcement would horrify you more than it, I will text you instead and say, thank you for your friendship. My life is more fun with you in it, and you are a good friend. Enjoy your weekend. Kapla! I found a meme, and I had sent it to Wilma and to Chris. Wilma and I particularly enjoy harassing Chris with cheerful things. Labyrinth memes, all sorts of stuff. And by the way, I have this little caterpillar here, which Chris got me. The little, hello, you know that, anyway. And so the meme said, I have a box of googly eyes with an intent to vandalize. And I was laughing so hard, I couldn't explain to him how I was going to put them on the Batman on his car. Which I never got to do. I know. And so I have the box of googly eyes, and I want everybody to take some and go vandalize something. I'm going to read you a message from a family friend, Ryan Olenkot, who is a family friend who could not be here today and asked that I read this. Chris and I met 20 years ago. We worked for CPS in Riverside County. I remember feeling a little intimidated by him at first, his gruff countenance and build. Chris reminded me of the guys who used to pick on me in high school. But I could not have been more wrong. Chris and I spent lots of hours together over the years, never as frequently as we would have liked, playing chess and watching movies and talking about life and death. Countless conversations. But there is one that sticks out for me. Many years ago, I separated from my partner of 9 years, and that took a lot out of me. I was depressed and crying a lot. Chris knew this and asked me to come over to his sister Teresa's house for some games and food and to get my mind off things. I said no, but Chris insisted. And I remember saying, "Chris, I might cry in front of everyone." He said, "That's okay, man. You'll cry. We'll cry. It will be fine." And it was. Chris was a kind, gentle soul. He was hard to please and opinionated, but real and respectful and a good friend to me. We used to call each other brother. Chris and I used to debate about whether there was an afterlife. I don't think I ever convinced him of one, but if there is an afterlife, we can all rest assured that Chris is there, drinking old-fashioned, besting other people at chess, ever the skeptic, but welcoming all. Because that's the kind of guy Chris was, and I'm gonna miss him. At this time, Teresa and Ali would like to say a few words.
How are you gonna lose? For those of you who don't know me, I'm Teresa, Chris's younger sister, not his twin sister. Not a public speaker, and I'd really like to punch Chris for making me get up here today. But I figure that he would be even more appalled that we're up here today talking about him, so I'm going to call it even. As I was struggling with what I wanted to say today, my phone started providing me with all manner of helpful quotes. And I mention that because if there's one thing I've learned about writing from my brother, who's been bugged for years to write a book, it's that if you can't find the words to say something, there's always a quote for it. So in that vein, I stumbled across a quote from Rahul Kaushik, and I probably horribly mangled his name. But it says, "Your brother will spend most of his time trying to show you how much you irritate him. But come any need, and he will do anything for you with a smile." My brother definitely put a lot of lip service into telling me how much I irritate him. I always called it our love language. It might be dysfunctional, okay, it's probably definitely dysfunctional, but that was our love language. But he was terrible at showing me that I irritated him. Even as a high school senior, a group that usually can't be bothered with little kids, Chris didn't bat an eye at taking his 12-year-old annoying kid sister on an hour-long drive to the closest movie theater to see Star Trek Generations. True, some might call that the start of the indoctrination into my geek life, and those people would be right. But that day is my first true memory of Chris as more than my big brother, who was there to alternately beat me up or hug me when I cried. That day, he became my friend, who was happy to share something he loved with me. And that sharing continued to books and video games and Dungeons and Dragons and comics and television shows and epic bad movie nights. And it continued to my own senior year in high school, when I was struggling to figure out how feasible it was to enter the Peace Corps and not be independently wealthy. And that's when Chris introduced me to social work. See, we both wanted to help people, but he'd already figured out how to help people and still have a theater nearby to go see the latest Marvel movie on opening night. And I joke about Chris's love of all things geek. We all have been. We didn't get together to talk about, we're going to tell you all about how much he loved movies. It just sort of happened that way because that was our relationships. But I joke about his love of all things geek. And what I want you to know is why he loved those movies, why he loved those comic books. And it's because we see so much ugliness in our lives, in our jobs, in the world around us. But the underlying philosophy of all those superhero movies and all those fantasy novels is simple. It's to help others. In whatever way you can, just help others. That's the good fight. One of Chris's favorite authors, Jim Butcher, said, "Faith is about what you do. It's about aspiring to be better and nobler and kinder than you are. It's about making sacrifices for the good of others, even when there's not going to be anyone there telling you what a hero you are." Chris wasn't religious, but in that regard, he was a man of great faith. Faith in humanity and that we can be better. So it didn't really surprise me when I'd show up for dinner at a steakhouse and find that he'd invited a random homeless woman to have dinner with us. And I suppose I took for granted that not all brothers who were starting their own family and still starving college students themselves would invite their little sister to come and live with them when she started college too, and then let her stay there until she finished grad school. That's just the man my brother was. I read somewhere once that in general, sibling relationships are the longest relationships of your lives. And that tends to make the bond between siblings unique. 40 years wasn't long enough. But in Tolkien's words, the journey doesn't end here. Death is just another path, one that we all must take. Godspeed, brother. I plan to see you on that path again one day.
As many of you may know, my dad was a huge fan of horror movies. And for as long as I can remember, I have been interested in all things horror, and I would be lying through my teeth if I said that my dad played no part in it. I remember the first time he sat me down in the living room at night, turned off all the lights, and had a horror movie marathon with me. We watched what are now considered our favorite horror movies, and ever since, we have always went to the movies together to see whatever scary movie had just come out. Around the Halloween season, he had this tendency to hide creepy dolls in rooms that I would frequent, his main target being my bathroom for me to find in the middle of the night. I will forever miss feeling on edge as I make trips to the bathroom at night as it gets close to spooky season. However, Dad was never limited to indulging in all things creepy during the Halloween season. I can confidently say that Mom and I will continue our Christmas tradition of watching Krampus and Violent Night after putting the tree up, which will continue to be topped with a Krampus head with glowing red eyes. And I will continue to make sure Mom's Christmas villagers will never be safe from zombies, spiders, and skeletons. Keeping these traditions alive will be our reminder that my dad lives on in our hearts and our memories.
I have another reading from a family friend, Layla. So this is hard to start off, but when I first met the Brannon family, they welcomed me with open arms. I'm the oldest in my family, so when I met Oliver for the first time, he was shy. I didn't think we'd be as close friends as we are today, but I'm so glad that we are. When I first met Mr. Brannon, sorry, I was definitely nervous. I can remember the cold stare he gave me sitting from his spot on the couch as I sat on the floor next to Sawin, giving him a big smile. I had a lot of fun going over to play with Oliver, and we'd hang out in the den. He'd show me games and shows. Oliver's birthday sleepovers were the best because Dad would use creepy toys and dolls to scare us the next morning, and we'd always have a lot of laughs together. I was worried he'd think I was a bad influence on Oliver, but one day, he looked me in the eyes and said to me, "You're a good kid." I know I gave him a hug that day and promised to always be there for Oliver. I'm grateful and have so much respect for Mr. Brannon. He is a hero. At this time, if there is anyone who would like to share a story about Chris, I'm going to leave that opportunity open. Or you can think of the stories in your head, because I suspect there may be other introverts here. Or you can go to the Kudo board and write them down, because that Kudo board that I developed for the family will be turned into a memory book. Or you can join us after the service for refreshments and stories and googly eyes. And so I just want to take a moment and just think about Chris and something funny.
My name is Chris. I'm Paula's little brother. And yeah, sibling relationships are crazy. And Paula and I can contest that for sure. They've been married 30 years. I remember when I met Chris, my dad and I were there to help them move. I love Chris, but he's not a physical person when it comes to moving. I got the scratches on the truck to prove it. I loved him, though. He was a good guy. I thought it was weird, but after so many years, we learned to love each other. I think we had one of those relationships where I would root for anybody who was playing the Broncos just to give him a hard time, because I didn't really care, but I loved just to see his reaction. I pretended to be a Raider fan for many years, it was fun, especially on Christmas when they'd come over for Christmas Eve and he introduced us to the Saran Wrap ball. Hours of fun in the garage watching 3 kids just go at a Saran ball trying to get whatever was in the middle. And I have a very competitive daughter, and she'd fight her older brother and older cousin just to get to it. It was really fun to watch. Chris introduced us to that. It was a lot of fun. I think as a brother-in-law, we got to have that relationship where he would call my kids post-fetus. Not sure how I felt about that to this day. But I knew he loved my kids, and that was important to me. And I think he knew that how much I loved his as well. I mean, we loved Ollie as much as we can. I know she came over to our house quite a few times, and it's been nights, weekends. So much fun having the 3 kids doing crazy things. I think when we lose someone, we tend to reflect on our lives. I didn't know Chris in a professional capacity because I was his brother-in-law. But I got to know him on a different level. He taught me things that, I don't know, it's just when you think of a social worker, you think they'd be social, but they really aren't. So it's kind of fun because I kept trying to talk to him and hang out with him, but I'm like, you don't talk. You'd rather find a corner in my house and read a book. We were okay with that, as long as he was there. Because our love language is proximity, and we loved having him in the house to enjoy time and hang out together. I would say the things we learned from him is just, life is short. Unfortunately, way too short. So don't go to bed angry, and make sure you love and hug the ones you love. Yeah.
There's a letter that Chris wrote to one of his best friends, Beth, who could not be here today, but gave me permission to read. This was a yearbook entry when they were graduating high school, and I feel like he wrote it to us. Miss Beth. They say time is the fire in which we burn. It would seem our time is just about up. The feeling that I've done this before is so fierce, it almost hurts. I really don't know how you handle it so well. Though the fates are separating us physically, I will always be with you. I'm sure that you noticed how reluctant I was to sign this book. I guess this represents goodbye, to me at least. I was not ready to face that then. Truth be known, I'm still not. May God protect you and keep you from harm, and may the road you walk be sunny and straight. Your friend eternal, Christopher. P.S. Know that I truly mean this with all my heart. If you ever need anything, remember, there is absolutely nothing I would not do for you. This is a reading from a book called The Lives We Actually Have, 100 Blessings for Imperfect Days. For the day of mourning. Today we are drawn into mourning. The complexity of love and loss warms our hearts and chills our bones. Just as the light of the sun illuminates the lines of a spider's web, invisible connections are revealed. We are wrapped up in love. Blessed are we who acknowledge the way our minds linger on the details. We know exactly how his mouth looked when he laughed, or precisely what it meant when he used that tone. Blessed are you when you have no reasonable plans to make sense of a world without them. How could we? It would be easier to pour the ocean into the kitchen sink. This love is bottomless. And blessed are we when we carry this grief with no dignity. Just some Kleenex and a look that says, you don't know who died today. How could you know unless you felt the way time today slowed until it meant nothing at all? Until I found him in my memories. Oh God, you alone know the whole of it. Their sufferings, their joys, their hopes, their winding paths, every moment of their being. Restore our souls even as you receive theirs. Welcome them in with the kind of embrace we long to give. Blessed is the time they were given and the time you now have. Whether in life or in death, love is the greatest, most stubborn truth. Amen.
dance in joy. I wanna dance in the graveyards, and while I'm alive, I don't wanna be alone. Mourning the ones who came before, I wanna dance with them some more. Let's dance in the graveyards. Gloria, like some other name we kept on calling.